And it turns out I was using way too little gear. So for so many years, the most I'd ever run in the off season was about 1,500 milligrams. And my Bloodwork was perfectly good on 2,400 milligrams. So I was running way too little gear for way too long. And now I know I can get away with a lot more because my Bloodwork and my health markers are better now than they were 2 years ago on less gear.
So how does more gear yield a greater result?
I don't know if it does. You mean like how does it for building muscle?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if I'm at 1,400 milligrams and I'm still I can get as heavy as 220 in the off season, and then I'm still dieting down to approximately 180, and that goes on for 5 years, then using more gear in theory will help you gain more muscle. Because in theory, gaining more muscle past that 1.4 grams or 1.5 grams is too difficult. That I'm beyond my genetic maximum. The only reason why I have as much muscle as I do is because of how much gear I'm running. So to raise that artificial maximum amount of muscle you can carry, you have to increase the stimulus to have that tissue.
Yeah.
So by going from 1.5 grams to 2 grams, I immediately started getting bigger.
Sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk.
When I went from 2 grams to 2.4 grams, I started getting bigger. When I went from 2.4 grams to 3 grams, I started getting bigger. Eating the same calories. I was basically getting bigger and leaner at the same time. Now, if I was to eat more, I would get even bigger. But that's the big thing, is how much do you want to add? Because at some point, you can't eat more rice. You can't eat more chicken. You have to add sugar, liquid carbs, or oil to your food to drive up the calories.
Mm-hmm.
But actual whole foods has a cap out effect. For me, 5 meals at a half a pound of meat and 300 grams of rice, that's pretty much as I'm going to be able to eat.
All right. So if there's a total gear threshold,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just throw something out there. And what if somebody's well over that? Right. So if you've been
Mm-hmm.
taking it for a decade or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where it is now,
Mm-hmm.
what if it's somebody that's just been on for a year? Is that threshold? In other words, what you're saying, is it going to apply? If somebody's just been taking gear for a year and they're making progress on 500 milligrams.
Right.
They can sit here and listen to this and think, fuck, I need to be taking 3 grams.
Well, that's a big difference. So like what I'm saying is, if you know for a fact, which it'd be very hard to know, but if you knew for a fact, you're not going to get anything more out of 600 milligrams, then go up to 700 milligrams.
But how would they know that? Right. Cause you were serial blood work, right?
Right. Well, that's more like this. So you're eating 3,500 calories, let's say, and you go up 5 pounds over, let's say, a month, and it's all fat. You didn't gain any muscle. Your lifts didn't go up. You're doing everything right. You're sleeping 8 hours a day. You're training to failure. The gear's real. You got it third-party tested. If you're gaining weight, but you're not gaining any muscle, you probably need more gear to make use of that weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
So if you then increase your gear, but keep yourself at 3,500 calories, the next month you gain like 2 pounds of muscle and 2 pounds and 3 pounds of fat. Now you're getting something out of that gear, and that might last 6 months before you need to use more gear. It might not be based on time. It might be about weight. Like I simply can't gain more than 180 pounds of lean tissue on 1.5 grams. But once I go up to 2 grams, then maybe I can get up to 185 pounds of lean tissue before I'm at a new maximum. And this is a new concept to me. I never really took any stock in this, that in theory, if you look at most of the experts, they'll say that 600 milligrams gives you the maximum benefit. Anything over that's a waste. You never need more than 600 milligrams. That's because no one's ever tested more than 600 milligrams. And no one's ever done tests on subjects for more than 12 weeks. And then who are they testing? They're not testing pro bodybuilders.
No.
They're testing regular people. So since the 3 parameters are non-applicable, then it's a completely invalid study for our population. So I'm not suggesting people should go out and take more anabolics, but there is a safe way of doing it. And it happens. It's the blood work is an important feature, but not all blood work is created equal. Like, you know, people say, oh, I got a full panel. My doctor gave me a full panel. I'm like, what doctor? A primary care doctor? His idea of a full panel is a CBC, a comprehensive metabolic panel, maybe a lipid profile, maybe a urinalysis. None of that's relevant. It doesn't apply. It's not valid. You know, like the GGT is the correct test for the liver in a lifter. The cystatin C is the correct test for the kidneys in the lifter. ApoB is a good test for cholesterol in everybody. But you can save so much money by just getting the right tests rather than getting the cheap screening test for $9 and then having to go back. Just get the right test. And then it's like, people say, oh, my hematocrit and hemoglobin's high. I'm like, how much water did you drink? Oh, none. I was like, okay, well, drink a gallon of water and get that redone and you'll be fine. And then so many guys have their primary care doctor selling them off for phlebotomy, and they're giving blood every 3-6 months to get rid of extra red blood cells when they're just dehydrated when they get the blood work done. And it's not there's no reason to do that. And so yes, there's a safe way of doing stuff, but yes, you could use blood work to, in theory, determine if you're healthy, but you're going to get way more false positives for disease with blood work than you will get actual positives. That they're going to see your creatinine's high. They're going to say you got kidney disease. Bullshit. That's your muscle mass is your creatinine.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to see your ALT and AST are high. They're going to say you got kidney disease. Bullshit. That's high because you lift weights. It's like they're going to see your hematocrit and hemoglobin are high. So they're going to say you've got overdose in testosterone. Bullshit. You just didn't drink enough water. Now, is it possible you could have kidney disease? Sure. Maybe use ibuprofen. Is it possible you have liver disease? Yeah, if you use oral steroids, but injectable steroids aren't going to cause liver disease, except for bizarre situations. Is it possible you got cholesterol problems? Sure. Probably because of your diet, you know, and it's probably not related to your gear. It's related to the diet. And if you're eating McDonald's 3 times a day to gain weight, then you're going to have fucked up blood work because of the diet you're eating to gain weight. And you wouldn't be doing that if you weren't on steroids. So there's a correlation, but it's not causality.
So what markers do you look at?
So like I use the cystatin C for the kidneys, GGT for the liver. I make sure they're super hydrated so that their CBC isn't all messed up, so that their hematocrit and hemoglobin are normal. I use ApoB for cholesterol. I mean, I still look at the HDL and the LDL, but if the HDL is low, it doesn't matter if your LDL is low too, because the HDL is only there to make a good value for your LDL. I really don't pay much attention to the testosterone so much, even because everybody's going to have a different expression. But typically, I'm not concerned if it's 1500. You know, a lot of labs cut it off at 1500, but there's nothing wrong with being at 1500. As far as E2, I mean, E2 is an important one because if it's too high, there's consequences. If it's too low, there's consequences. People aren't paying enough attention to their estradiol. And then the estradiol factors into your IGF-1 level. So most people don't order the IGF-1, so they don't know whether their GH is even working. There's people who don't even use GH, which blows my mind because GH is kind of more important than testosterone. So the GH and the E2 will beget the IGF-1 levels. And that's a good, you know, is systemic IGF-1 really indicative of anabolic potential? Not necessarily, but if systemic IGF-1 is adjusted by 40%, then that means that the local IGF-1 is probably also adjusted by 40%. So we may not be able to measure local IGF-1, but we can measure systemic IGF-1. And I can use systemic IGF-1 as a proxy for what I can anticipate the local IGF-1 to be doing in the environment we created.
So you're looking at that more than you are the testosterone level.
For sure. Yeah. Because yes, testosterone does a lot of stuff, but here's the thing. I'm not a proponent of running testosterone as a growth anabolic anyway. To me, the testosterone is a prohormone to estradiol. And estradiol's purpose is to convert GH over to IGF-1. That to me, you would run an actual anabolic to drive up your primary load. So a lot of people like to use test and primo And that makes sense because Primo metabolite converts into an AI, and the AI mitigates some of the effects of the test. So if you're running a 1-to-1 ratio of test to Primo, you typically are going to have, and your typical person will have a 40 estradiol, which is great. It's very good. It's healthy. It's in the upper end of the normal range. Me personally, I convert GH to IGF-1 better at a 100 estradiol. Anything over 100 estradiol, I get no benefit. If I bring that estradiol down at all, then I'm going to have a decrease in IGF-1. Even as little as 10 milligrams of Primo a day can have a drastic change to my IGF-1. So if I was to be at a 100 estradiol and I added 10 milligrams of Primo a day, I went from 20 to 30, let's say, then my estradiol would decrease all the way down to 86. If I was to increase both the test and the Primo again, let's say 20 tests a day more and 10 more Primo a day, it would drop my E2 down to 70. So I get almost exactly 15-point decreasement from 100 down for every 10 milligrams of Primo I add per day. On the other hand, Masteron doesn't do that for me. So I can run Masteron as a purely neutral anabolic that drives up total anabolic load, has no DHT conversion, so has no actual hair loss effect, and doesn't have any of the aggression effect. It also won't have any conversion to estradiol, nor would it inhibit estradiol. So whereas Primo indirectly is kind of dry, Masteron's completely neutral, whereas in Nandrolone will amplify aromatase expression, so the aromatase will convert more of the testosterone to estradiol. So Nandrolone by itself isn't wet, but when you add Nandrolone to test, now it really makes the test way wetter. So it's really hard to manage Nandrolone in a cycle with test. That's why for many years I tried Nandrolone only and I had great success with it. That you had not, it was perfect. Just running straight Nandrolone, nothing else works great. Other people don't like it because they don't like the low sex drive. And it's like, well, if you're not trying to please a woman, if you don't have responsibilities to a woman, you don't need a sex drive. In fact, it takes away one of the, here's the best way to put it. If you ask someone why they do heroin, they'd say because they're addicted to heroin. And it's like, if I could wave a magic wand and make you no longer addicted to heroin, would you do it? They'd say yes. But for some reason, men have a sex addiction integrated into their masculinity so that they take pride in being addicted to sex. And then that addiction is a hook someone can use to manipulate you. It's like, imagine if you could just not give a shit anymore and not be distracted by the concept of sex and just focus on your goals.
So you're saying that DECA will help people focus on their goals? Yes.
If you ran just DECA and not test, it's not that your dick doesn't work per se, it'll still work. And if it doesn't, you can use Viagra to make it work. But the point is, you don't need to have sex. You now have the upper hand per se, because your dick has more value to her than her pussy has to you. That you've changed the dynamics, the economy of genitals.
And you can get more work done.
Fuck yeah.
I need to take a bathroom break real quick.
I call it.
You guys are selecting Merrick for your telehealth platform needs. They have a couple different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. There's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are, thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk Merrick Health for all your hormone optimization and performance.
P.E.D.S was founded in 1998 with the aim to live, learn, and pass on. We've done this through training-related content
that allows you to become the strongest athlete and coach that you can. Over the past 2 decades, actually 2.5 decades, we've published more complementary training media than anybody else in the industry. When you look at the number of articles, the Q&As, the blogs, the videos, the podcasts, there's over 1 million pages of content that we've put out there. We've been able to do this through your support of Elite FTS. So when you purchased Elite FTS strength equipment, bands, accessories, gear, apparel, or anything through the site, you directly help support the content that we put out, which in turn helps support other people on their journey of becoming stronger and better coaches. So stronger athletes and better coaches, which encompasses the aim and the vision to live, learn, and pass on. So I thank you for the support that you've been giving for the past 25 years and encourage you to keep supporting Elite FTS into the future so we can all help more people become better and stronger. Discount code Table Talk for 10% off your first order. All right, guys, if you like the Table Talk podcast, then you're going to love the crew. If you're struggling with trying to get through a sticking point, you're trying to figure some specific aspect of your training out that you just can't dial in, you're dealing with injuries, you're trying to figure out how to better optimize your training, all the stuff you're seeing on social media is confusing, and all you need is a little guidance and support, or just somebody to look at your lifts to make sure that they're either heading in the right direction, or if there's a weak point in the lift, they can point out what that weak point is. Well, that's what we have the crew for. So when you join the crew, you get an extra Table Talk podcast each month called the Crewcast. You also get access to our Discord community, which has a training Q&A, form checks with top coaches, mindset section, nutrition, training logs, programs, over 30 ebooks, plus exclusive ebooks just for the crew, webinars, lectures, seminars, giveaways ranging from full strength equipment. We've given away many yoke bars this year. We've given away actually pieces of strength equipment as well as accessory items, and you get exclusive crew discounts. So go to the link in the description that says join the crew, click it, join now, and start getting stronger today. All right, guys, we've got a new limited edition drop, the original Mountain Dog tee that John Meadows had us design from the very beginning. So it's the first tee that he had made. Once again, this is a limited edition item, so when they're gone, they're gone. While I have your attention, you've seen me wear this one in a few podcasts to date. We've been holding back on it. This here, the 4-star tee, I think that's what we call it. It's on the website. New items, also under limited edition. Check out our shoulder saver pads. It's an easy way to do limited restricted range of motion exercises like board press that basically you just pop the pad on the bar, reduces the range of motion, pop it back off when you're done. Thank you guys for the support. Head over to elitefts.com.
So I want to circle back to a couple things. So there are a couple of notes that I made here. Is you were taught where I want to go. You were talking about daily dose, right? So I assume that you're talking sub-Q.
No, everybody draws that conclusion.
Yes,
because I don't know where that got started. So I can talk about the difference between sub-Q and IM, or I can talk about why I like every day. Is there a particular area?
Yeah.
So I like every day because the graph is going to be smoother. And I know that seems esoteric and abstract, but there's ups and downs, even with long-acting esters. And the amplitude of difference between the peak and the trough is where you fit the side effects in. That variability. If you could get a completely smooth line, your body would be cool. It wouldn't know anything was wrong. But this up and down shit is why trend gives people mood swings. It's why people get estrogen side effects. So the whole concept of decreasing the amplitude is either doing once a day injections or even twice a day injections, which people are going to, that's fucking absurd. But the point is that you would smooth that out so there'd be no excess conversion to DHT and no excess conversion to E2. When there's a huge surge in it, your body's like, what the fuck do I do with all this testosterone? It immediately starts converting it over to DHT and E2. So throughout the given day, you have like different conversion rates. So your aromatase expression might get upregulated. And so when they're doing 2 shots a week, dramatically worse side effects than one shot every day. And 100% of the time I convert someone from this barbaric system of doing some arbitrary amount of milliliters, because they don't measure, most of these people don't measure stuff in milligrams. They measure it, I do a half a cc or I do a whole cc every 3 days or every 2 days. Then there's these huge peaks and valleys. And they're like, not with long-acting esters. Yes, with long-acting esters. Yes, with long-acting esters. It's still up and down. It's not a dramatic to you, but it is up and down. Even if you did prop every day, it's going to be up and down. So even an athlete every day is going to be, there is some up and down. We want to get that, minimize that, to minimize the side effects from minimizing conversion. Now, the concept behind the sub-Q injections is that because there's less vascularity in fat tissue than there is in muscle tissue, it's going to absorb slower. So we flatten the curve. We've all heard that expression before.
Oh, yeah.
Let's flatten the curve of testosterone and do sub-Q. Okay. Let's say that would work. What would that do? Well, you've got smoother, if you were going to do 2 shots a week, it'll look like this. So you've flattened the curve because you're doing so few injections per week. But if you're doing everyday injections, you pretty much don't need to do sub-Q. Here's the other problem. Not everyone has enough fat to handle a sub-Q injection. So what they're going to get is going to get a lump under the skin, and they're going to get a skin irritation. So now you've got inflammation there. So now you've got improved blood flow. So now is it any less blood flow? Now it's more blood flow. We completely obviated the thing. We've also damaged the skin. So if you're a bodybuilder, your skin is a very important body part that no one ever trains, right? No one ever thinks like, what's the skin condition? Well, if you're wrinkled or tatted or pimply, you're going to lose. If you've got scar tissue or stretch marks, it's going to hurt you. So for 44, I've got really fucking awesome skin. It's one of my best weapons. Is that my face looks old, but the rest of my body looks relatively young because I just have good skin. And so that's a huge part of being shredded and grainy on stage is your skin. So if you have like Sharpay skin, you're not going to do as good as someone who's got super thin skin that isn't wrinkled. And just like skin color really has a huge impact too. So by injecting the skin, you're fucking up your skin. And that's the other thing is I use insulin syringes every day unless I'm going well over a cc a day. That's the only time I think you would want to use a hypodermic syringe is if you're going to go multiple cc's every day. That's when the patience of doing 2 insulin pins at 29 gauge versus 1 IM pin at 27 gauge, then I'm going to lead to the 1 IM pin of 27 gauge. With the hypodermic syringe, but you can do an insulin syringe in the delts, in the triceps, in the quad, and it's not very deep in the skin. I mean, it's not very deep in the muscle. It's still closer to the surface of the muscle, but you're still going to absorb it faster and then in the skin than injecting a sub-Q, and it's also not going to cause inflammation like you'll get with the sub-Q. A lot of people even get inflammation on their skin when they do GH and their insulin shots. Now, I personally have always done insulin and GH in the muscle. And I could talk for an hour and a half just about GH and GH timing and GH brands and GH methods of it, like why IM's different all the way down to the atomic level, because that's one of my favorite subjects is growth hormone. But and I've got a lot of videos on my YouTube channel about it, and specifically in the advanced discussion show with Kurt Havens. But in the end, I'm one of the only people I know that's a really hard and fast, strict guy about everyday injections in the muscle and using an insulin syringe. And the only time I would actually say the hypodermic syringe would make sense would be if you're using more than a cc a day.
Well, that's assuming that they're not fat as fuck.
Well, if they can't reach the muscle, they don't have a choice. But if they can't reach the muscle, like in other words, the needle won't get into the muscle because it gets stuck in the fat, then there's enough fat to absorb all that oil.
I get what you're saying. So either way.
Yeah. You do your best. And then people are like, well, if you inject into the muscle, it leaks into the fat. I'm like, so what's your solution? Just inject the fat anyway? Then what difference does it make? Like, how does one obviate the other? It's just do your best.
Right. Then whenever anybody's speaking about Primo and some of the other compounds, there's a lot of people that are listening and that are using the compounds, they may not actually be taking Primo,
right?
Because they're buying shit from the dude at the gym.
I find that that's almost no longer the case because of how popular Primo has gotten in the last couple of years. Now there is enough sophistication that people are sending it to get third-party tested, that they can bust a dealer, then the dealer's reputation is ruined. So every drug manufacturer or dealer, we're going to call manufacturer because I want to treat them with respect. Because in my opinion, the underground labs are not, at least currently in 2023, they're not drug dealers. They're alternative medicine sources for people that can't get access to the medicine they need due to ignorant government regulation on certain drugs and not others. Like, why is Primo illegal and Anadrol is legal? Like, clearly they have no fucking idea what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, I think you were mentioning, you may have to cut this out, but that the flavoring on tobacco is illegal because vape flavoring's illegal. It's like, stupid fucks. It's the popcorn lung caused by the flavor agents in the vaping is why it's illegal. It doesn't hurt you if it's in chewing gum. What the fuck difference does it make at that point? And they're like, well, we made the flavoring illegal. It's like, oh my fucking God. How are you fucking allowed to breathe with like a little, like there's a certain point where your IQ is so low that you stop having autonomic functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think politicians are at that point. Like if the president can't make it through a speech without shitting his pants, then why am I surprised that people are going to outlaw flavored gum because it has flavoring because some kids might vape, And so the same thing is like, what stupid fuck thinks that Anadrol is a better choice than Primo? And it's like, well, it's been proven to raise red blood cells. I was like, yeah. And it's like, so it's for anemia. It's like, this motherfucker is not for anemia. And it's like, same thing with the Primo. It's like, well, Primo's for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It's like, no, it's not. It's for growing muscle. They just fudged that because they needed to get approval for it. So they made up some bullshit and tested that group. It's like Masteron, it's for breast cancer. You don't have breasts. Why would you take Masteron? It's like, oh my God, just because it works in breast cancer doesn't mean it doesn't grow muscle too. And so the way that they test these drugs to get them approved for something so they can cash in on them and get them on the competitive market is they can't just do redundancy. Each company comes out with a different drug to cash in on that market. So they have to indicate that there's some advantage to that drug or place. So for example, tamoxifen versus Clomid. Clomid was made to be breast cancer meds. It just sucked. It didn't work. So it couldn't get approval to compete with tamoxifen because tamoxifen was just better. So they're like, well, let's give it to men. And so they got it approved to give it to men. That doesn't mean tamoxifen is not better for men too. COVID's just a shit drug. I mean, not COVID, Clomid's just a shit drug. And some people are like, well, no, the evidence shows blah, 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 blah. Maybe you have a study that shows that Clomid is better for men than tamoxifen. But when you take into consideration that there was an ulterior motive, that they wanted to prove that it was better for men, then they can fudge the method section and set it up in such a way that it proves their point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily reliable just because one study says something, because they have a for-profit reason for fudging the data. You can pay the scientist for the result, and then he'll design the methods that'll generate that result. That's kind of how that business works.
Yeah.
So especially with the pharmaceutical company, we're talking in the billions. There's no reason for there to be any ethics at that point. So back on the topic of the UGLs are going to probably get their hands on real Primo at this point because Primo is now so popular that it's just stupid of them they get caught one time with bullshit and it's going to be all over message boards. No one's ever going to buy that brand again. As a business owner, you can't just fuck over customers and expect them not to haunt you. Certainly not in the information age.
Yeah.
You got to do good business practices. Whether it's in a GMP facility or not, it has to be good business practices.
What would make one compound better for strength than another one?
That I don't know. I think Anadrol is better for strength because that's what I've heard anecdotally. My personal experience is I got more of a strength benefit out of Anavar. and tren, even though that doesn't even make any sense.
Well, what I'm trying to wrap my head around is why?
I guess nervous system activation. So the DHT is supposed to help facilitate the neuromuscular junction. So the afferent nerve fibers, I think the motor A1 fibers, the widest diameter fibers, act on the neuromuscular junction by releasing acetylcholine, which binds to the nicotinic receptors, and then that causes the contraction of the muscle fiber. So I think that, I don't know mechanically where the DHT actually facilitates that occurrence, but I believe that if you can squeeze 100% of the muscle fibers, you will get more force production than if you hit 50% of the fibers now and 50% later.
So wouldn't it hypothetically make more sense to only take that on the days that they would need to express that strength?
Which is why I always say that I can see why someone would use Anadrol before the meet, but I don't see a point to Anadrol or any other time. That I don't think that running it through weeks would make sense, except for it would probably fuck up your periodization to have undulating strength.
Yeah.
So that's why they use it consistently. But then you're also going to fuck up your organs and where.
Well, would it be undulating strength if it's, a heavy squat day once a week leading into the last 5 squat workouts?
Right. And that's why I would always prefer Anavar sublingually. That Anavar sublingually can bypass the liver, goes directly to the muscle. Plus, when you take Anavar sublingually, instead of having an 8-hour half-life, it has closer to a 1-hour half-life. What does that mean? It's like, well, it means it's in your blood for an hour, not for 9 hours. That doesn't mean it just ceases to exist. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It had to go somewhere. So in all likelihood, it's not in the blood because it's in the muscle. We actually got the Anavar where we wanted it to go because we did it pre-training. So sublingual Anavar while you're driving in the gym, either crushing up an Anavar and sticking it under your tongue. I think through Fusion, the HRT clinic I work with, there's a sublingual tabs that are dissolvable you can put under your tongue, and that'll actually give you the strength output you want. So to me, being purely logical and not having competed in powerlifting a very long time, like 12, 13 years, I would think that sublingual Anavar would be a safer, better option the day of the meet. So you have an unreasonable amount of extra strength so you don't miss any lifts. You're not going to calculate in superhuman strength because you're just trying to break your PR that day.
Yeah, but every meathead out there is going to think I'm going to use it on my heavy days.
Right, which is going to just fuck up the whole system because now your joints are getting extra wear and tear. You're not actually stronger. You're just moving more weight. Your joints are getting much more wear and tear. So whatever lagging or nagging injuries are going to be exacerbated leading into that meet. And now you're more likely to have extreme pain on meet day. And pain, no matter how tough you are, pain is going to inhibit the spinal cord. So the signal goes from the afferent nerve fiber into the spinal cord. Before it goes up to the central nervous system, like your conscious mind, I mean, technically the spinal cord is the central nervous system, but before it moves up to your brain and you can choose to ignore the pain, the spinal cord decides for you to push less force through the afferent fiber so that there's less force against the bar. So there's less force back into the wrist or the shoulder or the elbow. So the presence of pain inhibits strength directly without free will. So being super aggressive, like with adrenaline or anger, like DHT, can override that to a certain extent. So that's why if you're super pissed, you don't even feel pain because you've got the adrenaline going and you're stronger that way. But I think a lot of the reason why you're stronger with adrenaline is because you're not pain inhibited.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where does tren fall into this? Because the powerlifters will lean more towards that because they'll say it's more of a strength.
I think it has to do with more brain damage. That you have more brain damage with tren, so you have more anger. So I believe specifically it's either the amygdala directly or near the amygdala there's going to be more beta pleated sheets accumulated. So
wouldn't that play into the same issues that you're talking about with the Anadrol, the full cycle though?
Right. So with the tren, that if doses over 5 milligrams a day, you're going to get an anti-cortisol effect. Now, the cortisol receptors in the brain protect it. And so as you use more tren, you're taking away protection from the brain. Then the other thing is tren makes it harder to sleep through a couple of different mechanisms. One of which is it's an uncoupler in the mitochondria, and it leaks energy out of the mitochondria, kind of like DNP does. That's how it's good for fat loss. Another way that it's good for fat loss is it inhibits TBG, thyroid binding globulin. So it inhibits the conversion of, basically it amplifies the amount of T3s that's available and present, which will result in less sleep. Now, when you don't sleep, you don't clear beta-pleated sheets. And so beta-pleated sheets, as they accumulate in your brain, I think in this case, it's the hippocampus or the amygdala. They're next to each other, so they kind of overlap to some degree. What you'll get is Alzheimer's disease when you're older. That's the biggest hallmark feature of Alzheimer's disease, is a huge accumulation of beta-pleated sheets. So in theory, you can mitigate the risk of Alzheimer's by getting good sleep, which means that tren can lead to Alzheimer's. Tren can also lead to direct brain damage because of the inhibition of the cortisol's protection. How does that manifest in a lifter? Well, the amygdala is the emotional control and anger part of the brain. And if you have brain damage to this emotional control, then you're going to be more prone to explosive rage. So, I mean, I think anyone who's used trends knows that with tren, there's no buffer. That normally you'd be able to just tolerate something irritating and it's no big deal. With tren, something's on your nerves, like the dog barks and you scream at it. Like you will be prone to an act of violence prior to even considering the act of violence. You just act. And then you watch yourself as a third person doing something abhorrent that you're ashamed of. And there's nothing you can do to stop it because it's already over. That it's kind of like that situation where you're in an actual fight. You feel nothing. You're not thinking. You're not fighting tactically. You're just throwing punches or throwing objects. And you're watching yourself as a third person. And you practically don't even remember what happened. And your friends have to tell you how it went afterward. That's kind of like what it's being on tren all the time. And I believe that is the brain, one of those forms of brain damage that are common with tren. That's great when it comes to lifting weights. You're so much more likely to lift like an animal, an enraged beast, but it doesn't turn off. So back to what you were saying is, would you be wise just to inject tren right before the meet? Same thing could be said for Halo possibly. And that's why I think Halo and tren are so popular right before a meet. I don't know what the window of time is to maximize the benefit and minimize the risk, whether it's 3 days of tren and a day of Halo or 3 days. I know that for bodybuilding, it's supposed to be before the show. The last 6 weeks, you're on tren. The last couple days, you're on Halo once you pull all injectables, because you don't want to run the risk of fucking up your skin. Because if you have a lump under the skin, you're going to get dinged. You're going to lose a placing.
Would you see any difference in, if it's a strength athlete, you work with strength athletes and bodybuilders as well, should their cycle be any different than what a bodybuilder's off-season cycle would be? Because aren't they basically trying to accomplish the same goals?
Yeah, I mean,
kind of.
A bodybuilder's goal is to put on mass.
Yeah.
The strength is virtually irrelevant. The powerlifter's goal often is to stay within the same weight class and just gain strength. And I don't know that there's any pharmacological way to permanently increase strength, just temporarily increase strength. So to me, the strength drugs like halotestin or tren or anadrol make sense the day of the meet or the week of the meet, no other time. Because by being stronger while you're training, you're actually not training your nervous system to get stronger. It's kind of like letting the drugs do the work for you. You are also damaging the joints and connective tissue. So you'll be in more pain the day of the lift, which means you have less.
Yeah.
You have more inhibition on it. I would want so back to your question is it different? If the powerlifter wants to go up a weight class, it is not different. Their accessory work and nutrition would all be based off of hypertrophy. their training would be periodized with their big lifts to build up to a peak strength output. And of course, the hypertrophy shouldn't get in the way of that progression.
Well, let me rephrase the question then, because then this is where I'm leading, is the PEDs for the strength athlete should be based on recovery,
Right.
helping them recover from their sessions,
Right.
because their training should be smart, not fucking stupid,
Right.
and to be able to progress through there. So how would that cycle be different than the bodybuilding cycle trying to put on muscle?
I really don't think it'd be that different, except for it'd be less.
So
I just don't think a powerlifter needs to use as much, because at what point do you maximize recovery? And is that point less than the point where you could maximize hypertrophy? And the answer is probably yes. That you probably could get away with 250 tests a week and get most of the recovery benefits you're ever going to get. I don't know how much more benefit you're going to get, like some EQ or some DECA, because it's going to have some collagen synthesis to help with recovery in that capacity. You know, EQ is going to be relatively drier because it's got an AI metabolite, whereas DECA is going to amplify estradiol conversion. So if someone's running 250 tests and maybe 300 or 400 DECA, that might help with recovery and the joint recovery and have the anti-cortisol effect of the DECA, although that could be a downside. We might want to use EQ, might have to use more tests to be able to handle EQ. But I don't know if you need to use a gram or more than a gram of gear just to recover from workouts.
all right, well, this is also under the assumption that their diet is on point.
Well, right. And that's a big assumption. And I would say, like, okay, if you're going to have a conversation about gear, you have to assume all the other variables are fixed. And then that we have perfect sleep, perfect diet, perfect job stress, perfect relationship stress. So we got a zero stress at work, zero stress with your girlfriend or wife, zero stress with your kids. You're getting 8 hours or more of sleep. You're getting 2 gallons of water, 10 grams of salt, unless you got hypertension issues or kidney disease. You're getting all your calories you need from all whole food sources, getting all your micronutrients accounted for, vegetables, perfect bowel digestion, perfect colonic health. Like everything's perfect. Then now gear is something you would use. And then in that case, I think that the daily injections, intramuscular of test and GH in the correct ratios based off of your E2 output and your IGF-1 conversion, maximize that IGF-1 conversion. Once that IGF-1 conversion is maximized, don't need anything else.
Now, if all those other variables, because in the real world, all those other variables are not on point.
Right.
Right. And then the drugs come in like a buffer, you know, but it's not really. So
I think of it's like everyone watched Fast and the Furious, at least one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, drugs are like the nitrous. So if you're a shit driver in a shit car, the nitrous ain't gonna help. If you punch the nitrous too fast before you've started your turn, you're not gonna pull through the turn. You're just gonna rocket into the barrier. So if you need to master the skills of food and stress management and recovery before you ever start playing with using gear at a performance enhancement level. At a hormone replacement level, sure. You can get away with 20 milligrams of test and 2 units of GH every day for the rest of your life for pretty much everyone over 20 years old. You know, everyone over 40. Everyone over 40 could use 20 milligrams of test and 2 units of GH safely, effectively, and it will facilitate everything in a very good way. You start pushing harder than that, then you're focusing on the wrong shit. So, you know, sometimes I don't have perfect sleep, but I do everything right. Like I've got a sleep hygiene video with 8 different steps of sleep hygiene, and I do everything right, but it ain't gonna budge. And the same thing with the food thing. It's like my food isn't perfect, but that's not perfect by professional bodybuilder standards. Other people would think I'm absolutely insane when it comes to how diligent I am about food. Stress management, don't have a girlfriend, don't have relationship stress. It's a crude way of like, my arm hurts. What am I going to do? Cut it off. Now it doesn't hurt anymore. You know, it's like the same thing with the job management. It's job stress. It's like, I don't have a boss. I'll own my own businesses. It took me 15 years to figure this shit out. But now that I'm the boss of my own life, I don't have any job stress. So once you've mastered stress, and once you've mastered sleep, and once you've mastered food, and once you've mastered training, and training's a process. As you get bigger, you have to change your lifts. Your rep ranges go up as you get stronger because it becomes harder and harder and harder to recover from heavier loads. But the gear thing is relatively easy to dial in once you do it the right way. And you introduce the test, you modulate the E2 with the Primo. If you need more of an androgen load, you can add in something neutral like a Masteron and drive that up. And the GH is a big driver too, is affording GH and sourcing affordable GH, that's real GH, is a huge thing in and of itself. And then using that GH to get the best benefit without having too much of the side effects like narcolepsy, where you fall asleep in the middle of the day for no reason, carpal tunnel or tingling in your hands, and you can't, to the point where you can't hold dumbbells. At that point, you're using too much GH. Or if you cap out your IGF-1 response at 6 units of GH and you go all the way up to 12 and you're side effect free, if you can afford it and there's no side effects, maybe you should use 12, because we don't really know what's happening at the tissue level. We only know what's happening at the liver level. And the liver IGF-1 isn't going to grow muscle like the tissue IGF-1. But we can't measure the tissue IGF-1. We can only measure the liver IGF-1. So we've got a proxy, and we can assume that there's a relationship, a correlation. We probably don't think that if the liver IGF-1 is going up, the tissue isn't going down. But just because the liver isn't going up anymore doesn't mean there isn't a benefit at the tissue level, especially from direct means of the GH causing anabolism, which used to be believed was impossible, but actually it turns out there is actually some mechanisms that does work.
What about insulin?
Insulin it's interesting because insulin is a way of controlling and facilitating the carbs. So a lot of people see a relationship between the insulin and the GH. I think if everything's perfect, your blood glucose doesn't go up from using more GH. I think that that's more of an artifact. There's a correlation, but I don't think it's causality. I think that people's blood sugar goes up as they use more GH because they're using more food. And that it's not an isolated variable. They're not just having the same fixed training, the same fixed sleep, the same fixed life stress, the same fixed drug load, the same fixed calories and food, and then they just double their GH. I don't think they're going to see as much of an increase in blood glucose as they think.
So what would be the point of post-workout insulin?
Because you're going to have post-workout carbs, and you want to shove that into the muscle while they're open so that you're hungry again sooner to get in your next meal. So to me, insulin's function in a bodybuilder or possibly in a powerlifter is a appetite facilitator. If you eat 200 carbs and your stomach is full, you're going to be hungry again in maybe 4 hours. If you were to shoot insulin with that, you might be hungry again in 2 hours. And the cool thing about this is, if you use insulin without GH, you're probably going to get store in the fat and the muscle. But it seems that when you use GH, because the IGF-1 can bind to the insulin receptor, and it isn't necessarily stimulatory, and the insulin can stimulate the IGF-1 receptor marginally, but the IGF-1 doesn't really stimulate the insulin receptor. So if you flood the system with enough systemic IGF-1, it's binding to these fat cells. And then when the carbs enter the system and the insulin's in the system, the insulin isn't really going to stimulate the fat cells to take up the carbs. The hungry muscles will take up the carbs.
So then would the intra use of the insulin just be able to drive more calories in?
Mm-hmm. For the most part. Now, I do see a performance in pump when I use insulin pre-Humalog specifically, but that's probably just because there's carbs going into the muscle, not because it's actually making me lift more weight, but because I have more carbs going into the muscle as the workout persists.
Is that because of the carbs, or is it because the insulin's helping to drive the carb?
I think it's the insulin driving the carbs, because if I have the same amount of insulin, if I have the same amount of carbs, 90 carbs inter-workout, and I use 5 units of insulin before I train, I'll get a good pump, and my workout will start going to shit after maybe 45 minutes or an hour. If I go up to 10 units of insulin, I'll have a better pump and my workout will be better for longer. So let's say I'm doing a set of triceps and I get 15, 13, 10. You know, like the first set is short of failure. The second set, I fail at 13. I couldn't match the 15. And the third set, I've got 10 reps. I failed way early. If I was using more insulin, I might get 15, 15, 13, which to me is pretty dramatic difference.
So it's a training stimulus, not a recovery stimulus.
Well, the pre-training one is.
Yes.
Then the post-training is recovery.
Because the carbs are getting there sooner, or just because you're getting more carbs in the day?
I think because you're getting more carbs in the day and because you're getting them sooner. Because the sooner you hit the system with what it wants, the better the effect. Because that post-training window is when it's a pretty good time. I don't want to say it's the most anabolic time, but it's definitely the most receptive time. The best conversion of GH to IGF-1, short of bedtime. The best, you need the insulin to be anti-catabolic during that time. And you may not actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis, but the insulin and the IGF-1 will stimulate the AKT pathway, which includes mTOR. You don't necessarily need the leucine directly to stimulate mTOR, although most people are going to have leucine from either BCAAs or EAAs or whey protein post-training. If they're sophisticated enough to use insulin and carbs and GH, they're probably sophisticated enough to use leucine, or at the very least whey isolate.
So there could be a case for both, intra and post.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would do all three. Yeah.
What do you mean all three? Pre, during?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like my protocol is pretty complicated, but, and sometimes I don't do it all the whole thing, but you would have, let's say, chicken and rice 2 hours before you train. Then you would have probably GH and insulin pre-training. And then in the workout, you would have EAAs and, well, okay, pre-training would be insulin and GH, possibly sublingual anavar, Viagra, as well as a pre-workout drink with HCBDs. And the pre-workout would have some type of nitric oxide precursors, some type of agmatine sulfate to facilitate that. It would have 500 milligrams of sodium to open up everything, some taurine. It would probably have a plethora of other stuff. And then the intra-workout, I would have like RALA, cinnamon, chromium, so that I can open up the tissue to receive the carbohydrates through non-insulin means. Basically, make sure the GLUT4 transporter can be transcribed, make sure the GLUT4 transporter can translocate to the surface of the cell, make sure that the insulin receptors and the Janus kinase receptors, the two halves, are able to meet quickly and efficiently on the cell surface by having a soft cell wall or cell membrane, which is done with the RALA and other omega-3s. Intra-workout, you can hit it again with an IGF-1 DES or IGF-1, another short-acting IGF-1. You can hit it with an MGF. You can hit it with more Humalog, which I don't think is necessary because Humalog's a 3-hour half-life. If you're doing it before and after, you don't need it during. But you can hit it with IGF-1 during. Of course, carbohydrates and EAAs, intra. And then post, you can hit it with whey or more EAAs, more HCBDs, more Humalog, more GH, and then have more food. Because usually you don't want to have the GH shorter than 6 hours apart. But if you're using Humalog, the insulin receptor, when it's bound, is going to resensitize the tissue to receive the signal from the GH receptor. So that if the post-workout, even though you're shooting your GH and insulin at the same time, the GH, the insulin, if it's intramuscular, is going to hit your bloodstream in about 5 or 6 seconds, whereas the GH will hit your bloodstream in about an hour. So you still, but even though you shoot them at the same time, by the time they kick in, it's staggered anyway.
All right. So now we're getting into the timing of GH.
Right.
Right. So that there's morning, there's evening, you know what I'm saying? So
right.
It's all going to be dependent upon whatever they're trying to achieve. Correct?
Yeah. This one's a really complicated one, and it's going to piss some people off. Oh boy, are people going to get pissed off about this. So let's first define GH. GH is 191 amino acids. The type that's used synthetically is 22.1246 kilodaltons. So what that means is there's a 192 variant GH, and if that molecule is broken into pieces, it's no longer going to be 22 kilodaltons. There's different tissue types that make different GHs, whether it's placental, like fetal GH, what the baby is exposed to, versus the GH that's meant autocrine. There's actually GH made in the testicles that works on the testicles. It's super complicated in that regard, but that's not relevant to injectable GH. Injectable GH is one thing, 191 amino acids, 22 kilodaltons. There is a belief that pharma grade GH is better than generic GH. The use of the word generic is pejorative. So they call underground labs anabolics underground labs, but they call underground labs GH generic. So it's disrespectful in and out of itself right out the gate. There is a scientist who went from America to China and went to, I believe, one of the companies. I probably shouldn't say the name, but there are 5 different companies in China that can make this stuff. And they started teaching the correct mechanism of making GH to one of these 5 companies. And that was making actual 191, 22 kilodalton GH. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you get these blue tops, the red tops, the yellow tops. It's all garbage. But since that time, now in 2023, all 5 of the major manufacturing places in China are making the exact same stuff, which is the same stuff the other pharmaceutical companies, the one in, I believe Serostim is made in Switzerland, and I believe Genotropin is made in Belgium. And there's the stuff that's made in China is very similar, down to the excipients. So I have excipient lists from each of these different companies as what they put into the GH on top of the GH itself to see how it works and what it does with it. Whether they use mannitol, which is a diuretic, whether they use other things. And in the end, the biggest difference between all the different brands, whether they're Chinese or European manufactured, is the excipients, not the actual parent hormone itself. I've even so far is to have the same batch of GH tested in China, and I have the reports in Chinese with the mag spec, and then I had them tested again in one of the major US facilities, and they came out the same. It's, in fact, there's a little bit of strand breakage. So remember how I said the 191 GH doesn't actually, there's multiple different versions of GH depending on where the break is. So if something says it's 98% pure GH, that doesn't mean the other 2% is lead or mercury. What it means is that 98% of that GH is the right molecule, the 191. The other 2% is at some point in the handling of it, they've broken those strands. And so 2% of those strands are broken. So it's not on a shipping container from China over to the US. You could put on a plane and it's flown here. So it doesn't take that long to get here. It doesn't get, the heat thing doesn't really matter. Whether it's refrigerated in transit doesn't really matter. It has to be refrigerated after it's reconstituted because it's reconstituted in water, and water grows bacteria quickly. But there's no evidence that it can be jostled or shaken or any of that bullshit. And if you actually read the package inserts on most of the actual farm grade stuff, they don't say to refrigerate it before you use it. Then when you follow the directions for mixing it, there's going to be bubbles the way they do it. I mean, a lot of them are in pens already reconstituted, or you reconstitute them yourself and you were supposed to refrigerate them or discard them, whatever. So most of the myths about GH are just false. So that being said, when do you shoot it? Most of the belief about how to use these drugs comes from the test group tested by the manufacturing company. So let's use Serostim, for example. Serostim is the gold standard, top of the line, made in Switzerland, manufactured in Massachusetts. It's the one that people consider to be the very best. It has the least amount of excipients. It has sucrose and phosphoric acid. So the phosphoric acid helps it dissolve faster, and the sucrose makes up, it's 41 milligrams of sucrose, 6 milligrams of the actual growth hormone. So that's because there's not enough growth hormone to actually fill the container. So you have 41, the sucrose doesn't really matter what it is. It's just there as a caking agent. It dissolved, and you're supposed to shoot the entire bottle of 18 units before bed subcutaneously. And that's supposed to prevent wasting from HIV. It was manufactured and approved for HIV specifically. That's how it gets approved. It's not like the government's just going to be cool with everyone making the same product. So if they're all using a third-party product, and then the only thing they're changing are the excipients, the way they get FDA approved is they say, well, our drug's for this disease, and our drug's for this disease, and our drug's for this disease, when really it's the same drug. It's just you're saying it's used for.
Yeah.
So the route of administration and the amount used and when is what makes it special for HIV. That's according to, I hope I don't quote him wrong, according to Kurt Haven, who is getting his MD, PhD double degree. He said that if you inject the whole thing at once at night, because we have a better conversion of IGF-1 at night, and we also release more of the binding protein 3, which is a good facilitator that hangs on to that and makes it last longer, you'll get a higher IGF-1 level, basically a better anti-catabolic effect. You'll lose less muscle if you're already wasting, specifically for AIDS and why AIDS patients are losing muscle. If you shoot the whole thing at night, and because it's sub-Q, we flatten the curve. So if it has a 4-hour half-life, but it takes 3 hours to peak concentration, and we have more BP3 available, now that curve gets extended out. So instead of 5 half-lives times 4 hours is 20-hour coverage, now it's extended to more like a 27-hour to 30-hour coverage. And most of your IGF-1 has a 30-hour half-life. So even though you're shooting it once a day, after 4 or 5 days of that, your IGF-1 levels have a steady state concentration so long, there's no point in doing multiple injections. Furthermore, there's a direct effect of the GH on top of the IGF-1, on top of other mechanisms that causes sleepiness. So if you were to break it up and do multiple shots throughout the day, you're going to be very tired. In fact, it might induce some narcolepsy. So this is why for almost everyone, the wisest way to do your shots is to do sub-Q before bed. Now, why do people do it why do they do it first thing in the morning? They do it first thing in the morning because they want to get the benefits of the GH for fasted cardio. The problem is if you inject it sub-Q, it takes 3 hours to hit your system. So if you're going to shoot your GH in the morning, then do fasted cardio, your fasted cardio is done hours before the GH even kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
So really, if you're using 4 units before bed, you're pretty much going to be at about 2 units 7 hours later, right before you wake up. And the maximum effect of fat loss usually occurs at 1.35 units per 100 kilograms of a person. So for a woman, it's like 0.6 units, which is 2.2 milligrams. For a man, it's like 0.4 milligrams, which is like 1.35 units. So if a guy shoots 8 before bed, he still has more in his system when he does fasted cardio than if he shot it right before he did fasted cardio, unless he did intramuscular. But like you said, most people can't reach the muscle through the fat. So they got to do it sub-Q. So the other benefit would be pre-training and post-training. At this point, only professional or top amateur level bodybuilders are ever going to want to do something this specific. But the refractory period to get the IGF-1 spike at the local level, the actual muscle tissue, for that to respond to the IGF-1, for that to respond to the GH with an IGF-1 spike, you need about a 6-hour refractory period in the absence of insulin, which would mean that you'd wake up, you'd shoot a morning shot, then you'd shoot a shot either pre or post training, then you shoot another shot before bed. And you could do the one before bed sub-Q, so it drags out a little bit longer. In order to benefit from a pre-shot and a post-shot, you'd have to be working out for like 3-4 hours, and you'd have to have an insulin spike somewhere in that. So pre-training GH, lift for 2 or 3 hours, post-lift insulin and GH. but you still have to wait 6 hours now, unless you're going to shoot more insulin before you go to bed. And you'd have to wait 6 hours before. So we're running into an issue where in order to do that type of fancy protocol, you're going to get less sleep, and sleep's still more effective for growth and fat loss than GH is, no matter how much you use. So most people are going to cap out on their systemic IGF-1 between 6 and 8 units a day. So doing 2 units, 2, 3, 4 times a day is usually where most people are going to get their benefits out of it. Using more than 2 units at once, there's no evidence to prove that you can get local IGF-1 conversion with more than 2 units, except for the Frost study in 2005 found that what we really get is local expression of IGF-1 from GH converting to IGF-1 at 7.5 nanomolar concentration of the GH, all the way up into 30 nanomolar. So based on that math, if 2 units can generate 7.5 nanomolar, then 2 units is the minimum amount you can shoot at one time to get a functional amount of IGF-1 conversion at the local level. It would imply that 8 units is the maximum benefit, except at night we get double conversion. So at night we get 13 nanomolar with 2 units, which would imply that at night you could get close to 30 nanomolar with 4 units, which would imply to get the maximum benefit, it'd be 8, 8, and 4. Now, that's based on who they tested. They didn't test anybody. They did it on in vitro. They took Petri dishes with muscle tissue. So how does that factor in with a 200, 300-pound man who's using a gram or 2 grams or 3 grams of testosterone and insulin? We don't know. We don't know how the testosterone and the estrogen that comes from the testosterone facilitates this conversion. We don't know how the insulin, which also facilitates the conversion, functions into this. That maybe less equals more with those, and or maybe the ceiling benefit is even higher. So I've ran a series of experiments on myself over a 3-year period, testing out not just what my E2 relationship is with primo versus masteron at given testosterone levels, but the IGF-1 generated from those E2 levels with a certain amount of GH. And I mapped out my specific response to be that at 4,000 calories and 2 grams total gear, 6 units of GH, and 100 estradiol, I cap out at 458 IGF-1. If I raise my GH, doesn't matter, nothing happens. If I change my E2 up, no benefit. If I bring my E2 down, my IGF-1 goes down. If I change brands between Genotropin, Chinese, generic, the one I tested was Metatropin, or Serostim, no appreciable statistical difference between those. What I did notice was the only thing that could raise my IGF-1 over 458 was when I raised my gear, my insulin, and my calories. I did not expect this to happen, so I didn't do them serially. I didn't do them one at a time. I did them all at once because I was like, I'm not making progress. I'm only got a couple months left of this off season. Let's push it. I'm going to go up on food, go up on insulin, go up on gear. And I did them all at the same time, which I normally wouldn't do because it's not very scientific.
Mm-hmm.
What I found was I got a 100-point bump to my IGF-1, running this basically the same amount of E2 and the same amount of GH at that point. So even though I capped out at 6, I was like, I'll just use 18 because that's the big thing now, is that 18 units of Serostim before bed is supposed to be the best way to use GH. And I was like, well, we'll see. It doesn't make sense to me, but we'll see. And what I found was when I switched to that method, I started getting way more abdominal fat. So I started instead to using 2 units twice a day and then the other 18 at bedtime. And that basically, the 2 fat loss periods I was missing on, I figured 2 units would be enough to get the benefits of the fat loss at those 2 other periods, but I could still use the 18 before bed and get the maximum anabolic potential out of it. Now, do I really need 18 before bed? Maybe there's no benefit over 12 before bed. But the point is that I found that I went up to 568 by increasing the food and the insulin and the gear. So what did it? Was it the food? Was it the insulin? Was it the gear? Was it a combination of the all three? But what it does tell me is my body's able to get more IGF-1 out of potentially the same GH and the same E2. Perhaps I could have still been at 6 units of GH and gotten that same bump from 458 to 568 by just increasing the gear. Maybe I could have gotten it from just increasing the insulin. Maybe I could have gotten it from just increasing the food. But when you increase the food, you're going to get more insulin conversion. So you never know. And the testosterone is supposed to increase the GH receptor's affinity to GH. And the GH is supposed to increase the androgen receptor to testosterone. So even if you're not going to get the IGF-1 out of it, it still makes sense to use more GH because GH does more things than just fat loss and muscle building. It also potentiates the benefit of the testosterone and the androgen receptor. So the long and the short of it is, what I came up with is 3 doses a day intramuscular. At least the first 2 should be intramuscular. The last one can be sub-Q. And you want to hit most of it before bed that you can afford. And then if there's enough to go around, so 2, 2, and X, where X is as much as you can afford. And then they found that the absolute limit of benefits for the patients, when they tested this, and I found this study a long time ago, and it was also other leaders in the industry brought it up too in their educational materials. John Jewett and Kurt Haven both have it in their materials at J3 University for John and Kurt Haven's book, the GH book he has. And that 30 units a day seems to be the upper limit for 100 kilogram male. Anything beyond 30 units a day has not been shown to be beneficial, but up to 30 units is beneficial. So would I suggest to someone going 2, 2, and 26? No, not necessarily. I don't know. But I know that I said everything that I think is verifiable, that I think is true, is 2, 2, and X based off of what you can afford. And people are concerned about blood work. And again, if everything else is buttoned up, airtight, like if you've got your diet and stress and sleep perfect, and you go into this perfectly healthy, perfect blood pressure, perfect pulse, you're doing cardio regularly, you're able to do 18 METs on a machine, no problem. You're perfectly healthy. I don't think that there's any risk from using 10 units more than 5 units of GH or 15 units more than 10 units. As long as you titrate up slowly, you'll adjust to any potential side effects like the numbness, the tingling in the carpal tunnel. I find a lot of people, as soon as they start getting the numbness and tingling in the carpal tunnel or the narcolepsy, they immediately roll back. They don't just lean into it and be like, okay, well, I won't drive and I won't work for 6 weeks and I'll see if I adjust to this much GH. Because what I found was 10 years ago, 5 units of GH used to fuck me up. Now I'm able to handle 22 a day just fine. It's just now, is that a functional amount? Maybe not. Maybe it's a waste. Maybe everything over 8 units is a waste. But I need to prove it. I need to at least prove it in the N equals 1, me, myself. How much can I get away with using and figure out what my upper limit is? Because what I've found is I'm not usually an outlier. I might be an outlier in that I have the data. I might be an outlier in the discipline. And even though I don't consider myself disciplined, other people might. But I'm not an outlier in how I respond to this medication when I replicate it. If a client does what I do or a patient does what I do, they get almost identical results. I get very rarely do people get completely bizarre results.
And to circle back to all PEDs and then the clients that you work with and even people that you speak to, where are they fucking up the most or the most common fuck up?
They're